In the early 1900s, the richest family in America gave its children an allowance of 25 cents a week. 25 cents. Not because the family couldn't afford more. This was the Rockefeller family, sitting on what would become, in today's dollars, one of the largest fortunes ever assembled by a single household. They gave their children almost nothing on purpose, and then made them account for every single penny of it in a personal ledger reviewed weekly by their father. This is not an accident, and it is not unique to one family. Long before an old money heir ever signs a trust document, opens an investment account, or hears the words estate plan, they've already absorbed a private curriculum, a set of silent rules about money, discipline, and identity, taught almost entirely without formal lessons, finished well before their 18th birthday. Today we're reconstructing that curriculum. Not the mansions, not the trust funds, the actual conditioning underneath them. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what an old money child learns, quietly, years before they inherit a single dollar. If you want the real architecture behind generational wealth, not the aesthetic, the actual formation of the people who inherit it, subscribe now. This channel breaks all of it down every week. The ledger. Why old money children account for every penny. Let's return to that 25-cent allowance, because the mechanism behind it is far more sophisticated than it looks. According to Nelson Rockefeller, son of John D. Rockefeller Jr., each of the 5 Rockefeller brothers received 25 cents a week and had to earn any additional money themselves. All the boys were required to keep personal daily account books, and they were required to give 10% of their income to charity, save 10%, and account for all the rest. They had to balance their books every month and be able to explain exactly what happened to every penny they earned. Notice the precision of that formula: 10% given away, 10% saved, the remainder tracked and justified. Not a suggestion, a requirement, audited monthly by a parent who had once done exactly the same thing as a child himself. And the extra money wasn't handed over either. To earn pocket money beyond the allowance, the children performed household chores, shining shoes, catching mice, growing vegetables, and cooking the family dinner once a week was also their responsibility. Nelson himself raised vegetables and reared rabbits specifically to earn money beyond his allowance. This was happening inside a household that could have purchased any object, any experience, any convenience instantly, without a second thought. This wasn't frugality born of necessity. It was frugality as curriculum. John D. Rockefeller Jr. himself said plainly, "I was always afraid money would spoil my children, and I wanted them to know its value and not to waste it." The ledger wasn't really about the 25 cents. It was a daily, physical ritual that taught a specific lesson. Money is not ambient. Money is tracked, accounted for, and justified, regardless of how much of it exists. The habit didn't stop at childhood. John D. Rockefeller Sr. himself kept a personal ledger he called Ledger A for his entire life, tracking every expenditure down to a single newspaper or spool of thread, and recording every charitable contribution he made, right down to money given to a poor girl he once saw on the street. Even as an old man, he kept that same small notebook locked in a safety deposit vault like a sacred relic. This is the part that separates a childhood chore from a genuine value system. The family's wealthiest, most powerful members were still doing it decades after they no longer needed to. The specific ratio matters too, and it recurs across old money households in different forms, even today. Give first, save second, spend last. By age 18, working as a clerk earning $3.50 a week, John D. Rockefeller was already giving around 6% of his income to charity, and by 20, he was consistently giving over 10%. A habit formed before there was any real wealth to speak of at all, which is precisely the point. The behavior was installed while the stakes were still small, so it would hold steady once the stakes became enormous. This is exactly the kind of mechanism-first breakdown this channel exists for. If this is resonating, drop a comment with the word ledger. It tells me you want more of these deep dives into the real formation behind generational wealth. The silence. Why old money children aren't told they're rich. Here's a detail that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Many old money children don't actually know how wealthy their family is until other people tell them. David Rockefeller Jr., great-grandson of John D. Rockefeller, has said he didn't personally know his family was wealthy until classmates told him. I actually had other people in school telling me I was a wealthy person, he told CNBC. I didn't personally feel rich, so I disagreed with them. This is a family with, at the time of that interview, an estimated $11 billion fortune, and a descendant who grew up genuinely uncertain whether the label even applied to him. David Jr. has explained why. In many families those days, sex and money were not subjects you talked about. The Rockefellers, like many old money dynasties, simply never explicitly discussed their wealth within the family. When the subject of money did come up at all, the conversation was steered toward the responsibilities that came with it, toward philanthropy, rather than toward the balance itself. This silence is not an accident or a family quirk. It's a deliberate insulation strategy, and it operates on children the same way it operates on outsiders, which we've covered in earlier videos on this channel. Visibility creates exposure. A child who doesn't know the exact scale of family wealth can't accidentally disclose it to a friend, can't develop an identity built on the number, and, critically, can't start making life decisions, consciously or not, that assume a safety net most people don't have. The Rockefellers deliberately downplayed their fortune even in their day-to-day lives. No yachts, no sports cars, no private jets. Nice homes and inherited artwork? Yes, but the family consistently preferred giving to spending and frugality to flash. Junior insisted the interior of the family's 79-acre estate outside Cleveland remain bare of luxury or pretension, even while the grounds themselves were covered in gardens and lakes his children could freely enjoy. Historians who studied the family described a strange duality: children surrounded by every outward sign of wealth, yet raised in the intimate daily setting of the household itself, like a poor little kid. This deliberate gap between outward appearance and inner household culture is itself one of the clearest markers separating old money conditioning from new money display. The wealth is real and enormous. The daily experience of it, for the children living inside it, is engineered to feel almost invisible. There's a psychological function to this too, worth naming honestly. Children who grow up believing money is unlimited often develop what family psychologists call entitlement without competence, a felt sense that resources will always appear, paired with no lived experience of the effort required to produce or preserve them. As David Jr. put it, reflecting on his own upbringing, it's very important that you not get used to going first class when you're a kid, because otherwise you don't learn the value of not having that. Our parents could have given us a lot more, and we would have been spoiled, and we would not have learned. The paperwork begins in infancy. While the cultural conditioning is happening at the dinner table, something else is happening in parallel, almost entirely out of the child's awareness. The legal architecture of their future wealth is already being assembled, often starting the year they're born. The workhorse tool here, still in constant use today, is the custodial account, created under a piece of law called the Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, or UTMA, the modern, broader successor to an older law called the Uniform Gifts to Minors Act, or UGMA. UTMA account is a legal and financial tool that creates a simple, inexpensive way to make an irrevocable gift to a minor. Think of it as a legally recognized piggy bank where an adult custodian holds the key. But the money inside irrevocably belongs to the child, who gains full, unrestricted control once they reach a state-specified age, typically 18 or 21. Here's the detail that makes this genuinely interesting rather than just administrative. A UTMA account can hold virtually any kind of property, not just cash and securities, but real estate, art, jewelry, patents, royalty streams, and even private business or LLC equity. A grandparent who wants to gift a young grandchild an actual stake in the family's private company or a fractional interest in a piece of land can often do it directly through this structure. Decades before, that grandchild could legally sign a contract on their own. There are no contribution limits on a UTMA account, though gifts above the annual gift tax exclusion, $19,000 per individual in 2026, or $38,000 for a married couple gift splitting, begin to draw down the giver's lifetime gift tax exemption. The funds must be used exclusively for the child's benefit, which in practice can mean education, a first car, extracurricular activities, or eventually a down payment on a home. But UTMA accounts have a well-known limitation that sophisticated families plan around carefully. Once the child reaches the state's age of majority, the custodian is legally required to turn over all remaining assets. No conditions, no strings, no ability to delay the handoff, even if the family believes the child isn't ready. For a family moving modest amounts, that's rarely a problem. For a family moving a genuinely large sum, handing an unprepared 18 or 21-year-old full, unsupervised control of a seven-figure account is often exactly the outcome they're trying to avoid. This is where a more flexible tool enters the picture: the 2,503 Minors Trust, and its close cousin, the trust with crummy withdrawal rights. A crummy trust gives beneficiaries only a limited window of time, often 30 to 60 days, during which they can withdraw a specific gift, rather than requiring the full trust balance to be handed over automatically at a fixed age. The withdrawal right typically only applies to the value of the current year's gift, not to the entire trust. This lets a family use the annual gift tax exclusion, moving money out of an estate efficiently year after year, while still keeping the bulk of accumulated wealth under trustee control on a schedule the family actually chooses, rather than one dictated by state default law. There's also a genuinely new development worth flagging because it's current as of this year. 2025 tax legislation introduced something called the Trump account, launching in 2026, essentially a tax-deferred IRA-like savings vehicle created specifically for minors. Beginning July 5, 2026, up to $5,000 a year can be contributed to a child's account. Employers can add up to $2,500 of that total, and children born between 2025 and 2028 receive a one-time $1,000 seed deposit from the federal government. Investments are restricted to low-cost U.S. equity index funds until the child turns 18, at which point the account converts into a standard IRA. It's a small, simple structure by old money standards, but it illustrates the same underlying pattern that's been present since the Rockefeller ledger. Wealth-conscious families start the legal machinery before the child can walk, so that discipline and structure are already built in by the time the child can talk. If terms like UTMA and crummy trust sound intimidating, don't worry. That's exactly why this channel exists, to make this language usable. Subscribe so the rest of this series doesn't get lost in your feed. The boarding school years, manufactured distance. Somewhere around age 8 to 14, a specific and controversial chapter begins for many old money families. The boarding school years. We've covered the psychological research on this in more depth in an earlier video on this channel, but it's worth restating the core finding here, because it's directly relevant to the silent curriculum theme. Researchers studying children sent away to boarding school at a young age have documented a recognizable pattern, sometimes called boarding school syndrome. Rooted in attachment theory originally developed by psychiatrist John Bowlby, which holds that early separation from a primary caregiver, even under comfortable and well-intentioned conditions, can produce lasting patterns of emotional self-containment. The stated purpose of early boarding education, historically, was never emotional distance for its own sake. Families genuinely believed, and many still believe, that the experience builds independence, resilience, and useful lifelong networks. And there's a practical argument for that. Children who board together with the sons and daughters of other prominent families are, whether they realize it at 8 years old or not, building the exact same private network of trusted peers that will later inform who they marry, who they go into business with, and whose family office they might eventually call for a discreet favor. But the emotional cost documented by researchers is real, and old money families have historically treated it as an acceptable trade. The pattern typically described is a kind of practiced composure, a comfort with formality and distance, and a corresponding discomfort with open emotional need that can look, from the outside, like the cold or reserved affect people often associate with old money culture. It's not usually experienced by the family as coldness. It's usually described internally as strength or self-sufficiency, virtues that were quite literally trained into the child during exactly the years when most children are learning to depend on a parent. This matters enormously for the theme of this video because it means one of the most important silent rules an old money heir learns before 18 isn't spoken at all. It's structural. Need is private. Composure is public. A child who spends formative years managing homesickness, hierarchy, and independence away from their immediate family arrives at adulthood with an unusually high tolerance for emotional distance, precisely the temperament that later makes it easier to sit calmly through a difficult board meeting, a contentious family trust negotiation, or a painful business decision without visibly flinching. Whether that trade is worth making is a genuinely open question that different families and different children within the same family answer differently across generations, and it's not this channel's place to render a verdict. What's certain is that it's one of the most consistent and least discussed threads running through old money childhood. The family meeting. Learning governance before you can vote by early adolescence, a different kind of education begins layering on top of the ledger habits and the boarding school composure. exposure to actual family governance, years before the child has any formal authority within it. The Rockefeller family, now in its seventh generation, with as many as 250 direct descendants, still meets as an extended family twice a year. Once in June at the family's historic Hudson Valley estate, and again over Christmas, when more than 100 family members gather in a single room. Children are present at these gatherings from a young age, long before they're old enough to sit on any committee or make any binding decision, absorbing, simply by being in the room, how the family actually talks about money, mission, and disagreement. A close observer who once sat in Rockefeller family investment meetings described a specific ritual. Each trustee is asked to write a letter to the family board explaining how they put their distributions to use. This is a remarkable piece of soft governance, not a legal requirement, not enforceable by any court, but a social expectation that turns receiving family money into an act of accountability rather than simple consumption. A young family member who watches older relatives write these letters year after year absorbs the norm long before they're the one holding the pen. Philanthropy plays an outsized role in this early governance exposure, and it's worth understanding why. Family charitable foundations, in the Rockefeller family's case, several of them, with combined endowments exceeding $5 billion, actively encourage the participation of family members in choosing which causes to support. This gives young family members a genuinely safe, low-stakes environment to practice real financial decision-making. They're allocating real money to real causes in front of real relatives, but the downside of a mistake is reputational and internal, not a threat to the family's core capital. David Rockefeller Jr. has pointed to this shared governance structure, not any single business, as the true glue holding the family together across generations. We had a business that supplied, through generation-skipping trusts, wealth that went down through the generations and dispersed through more and more people, but still was retained. But we didn't have a core business to fight over. This is a crucial insight for understanding why some old money families survive intact for centuries while others fracture within 2 generations. Many family disputes begin over a shared operating business. Who should run it? How it should be run? Who benefits? And a family that removes that single flashpoint early, replacing it with shared governance rituals instead, removes one of the most common causes of collapse. This is the part of old money that almost never gets covered. The governance training that happens years before any legal document changes hands. If you want the mechanism-first version of this world every week, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The unspoken rule of work: nothing arrives without effort. There's a final rule that ties everything in this video together, and it's less about a specific tool or ritual than a consistent, almost stubborn insistence. Whatever the family's total wealth actually is, a child is never handed money without first being made to work for at least some portion of it. Nelson Rockefeller was blunt about it decades later. His father gave the boys allowances, but if they needed more money, they'd have to work for it. Hence the vegetables, the rabbits, the shoe shining, the mice catching. The specific chores are almost incidental. What matters is the underlying rule. Effort and money are always linked, even when the family's total resources make that link mathematically unnecessary. This principle tends to scale up, not disappear, as the child ages. Teenagers in old money families are frequently expected to hold an actual summer job, often a deliberately unglamorous one, sometimes arranged anonymously, so coworkers don't know the family name attached to it, not because the income matters to the family's finances, but because the experience of being an ordinary employee, subject to an ordinary schedule and an ordinary boss, is considered a required rite of passage. David Rockefeller Sr. described it plainly. He felt it was important to appreciate the value of money and that he didn't have an unlimited amount, but he felt it was important to know where it went. A lesson that only really lands through the friction of actually earning and tracking money oneself, not through being told about it. By the time many old money heirs reach 18, they've spent a decade or more inside a specific, internally consistent worldview. Money is tracked, not assumed. Wealth is discussed in terms of responsibility, not display. Effort precedes access, even when access could be immediate. And governance, family meetings, philanthropic decisions, accountability letters is something you observe and eventually participate in long before you control anything outright. None of this guarantees success, and old money families have certainly produced their share of heirs who reject, resent, or simply never absorb the curriculum. A topic we've explored in an earlier video on this channel about heirs who walk away from inherited wealth entirely. But the pattern is consistent enough, across enough documented families, that it deserves to be understood on its own terms. By age 18, long before most of the legal machinery of inheritance has even activated, the deeper architecture, the habits, the silence, the governance exposure, the linkage between effort and money, is usually already in place. Here's what ties every rule in this video together. None of it required extraordinary intelligence, and none of it required secret information unavailable to anyone else. A 25-cent allowance and a ledger book cost nothing. A family meeting costs nothing but time. A rule that says work before you're given money costs nothing but consistency. What separates a fortune that survives 4 or 5 generations from one that dissolves within 2 isn't a smarter trust attorney. It's a family that started teaching its children how to hold wealth years before it ever handed any of it over, quietly, consistently, and almost entirely without the children realizing, at the time, that they were being taught anything at all. Old money doesn't just protect its capital. It manufactures deliberately and patiently the specific kind of person capable of protecting it after they're gone. And it starts that project in childhood, long before anyone else is watching. If this gave you a real look at what happens before the trust fund, subscribe to Old Money Opulence. New investigations into the real. Mechanics behind generational wealth drop every week. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.